Today we're talking about William Balfour, the brother-in-law of Jennifer Hudson, the singer and actress.
Balfour, aka J. Hud's former brother in law, killed three victims in Chicago. Let's speak their names. Rest in power, kings and queens. Jason Hudson was 29. His mother, Darnell Donerson, was 57. And Jillian King was just 7 years old. They were three Black Chicagoans. And yes, as we said, Jason was Jennifer Hudson's brother. Darnell was her mother, and Julian was her nephew. Balfour's MO was shooting with a gun and kidnapping, and the crimes took place in Chicago in October of 2008. So now we're going to dive into the setting. Now we are going to dive into Balfour's early life. So, by contrast, William Balfour came from a very dysfunctional family. He was raised by his mother and godmother, while his father served 30 years in prison for murder. His grandmother was incarcerated in 1969 for manslaughter, and his brother also had a lengthy criminal record.
According to some sources, William's mother was abusive, and in 1993, the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services found evidence she was abusing her sons, including an incident in which she tied up William's older brother, stuck a sock in his mouth, and beat him senseless.
At the age of 14, William was arrested for possession of heroin and possession of a stolen vehicle. His mother then gave up her parental rights because she said she had lost control of him, and he went into the foster care system. But he ran away every chance he got.
In 1997, he was placed in a group home downstate in Urbana, Illinois, where he attended 10th grade for 2 months before returning to Chicago. He dropped out of school, and at the age of 15, he became a member of the Gangster Disciples, a big street gang in Chicago, where his nickname was Flex.
But he worked at low-paying jobs, one as a grill man in a Wendy's restaurant and another at a steakhouse salad bar. He also began working on a long criminal rap sheet in 1998. He was arrested while driving a stolen vehicle. He was out on bond on November 29th, 1998, when a man saw William breaking into his brand new Chevy Suburban.
The man named Charles Gardner tried to stop him by jumping on top of the vehicle.
Wow.
But William, then 17, drove off with Charles still hanging on the roof rack.
Woo.
William tried to knock Charles off of the Suburban by driving over bumpy terrain and swerving, but Charles was still able to hang on to the vehicle.
And as police caught up with him, he drove through alleys, front yards, through a police barricade, and onto the Dan Ryan Expressway, sometimes at speeds nearing 100 miles an hour, all with Charles still clinging to the top of the Suburban. Man, this man's his determination. William eventually crashed into a telephone pole and fled. Charles suffered burns from fallen electrical wires and other injuries, but he survived. Whew.
William was charged with attempted murder, vehicular hijacking, and possession of a stolen vehicle. Because he was 18, he was tried as an adult. According to court documents, William told the judge that he had a good relationship with his mother until, quote, she gets an attitude.
William pleaded guilty to attempted murder and car hijacking, and in October of 1999, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison. In May of 2006, he was released, and he returned to the Englewood neighborhood where he grew up.
As an ex-con, William had difficulty finding a job. He finally found employment as a baker, but he was also a drug dealer.
Oh.
He also reconnected with Julia Hudson, one of the three Hudson siblings he had known while attending Yale Elementary School in Englewood.
Julia was a single mother who drove a school bus for a living and lived with her mother and brother Jason. William and Julia had a whirlwind romance, and 5 days after Christmas in 2006, the then 25-year-old William Balfour married 29-year-old Julia Hudson.
According to his mother, Michelle Balfour, William, quote, was in love with Julia and Julia loved him, unquote. According to Jennifer Hudson, quote, none of us wanted Julia to marry him. We did not like how he treated her. Where he was, I tried not to be, unquote.
According to a neighbor named Kevin Bennett, William was always doing crazy things, trying to carjack people. He was always asking for money. Bennett said that people were stunned when Julia married William, whom he described as someone that he did his best to avoid.
The couple lived with Julia's mother, Darnell, and Julia's brother, Jason, in the Hudson family home in Englewood. At some point, Jason had been shot in the leg, but he never sought medical attention. And afterwards, his mobility was limited and he used a cane to walk.
Mm.
Julia had a 7-year-old son, Julian King, from an earlier relationship with a man named Gregory King. And Julian also lived in the family home.
Balfour was at times loving towards little Julian and treated him like his own son, but often became jealous of the attention that Julia gave to her son. Julia later testified at trial that Balfour would get jealous, that he would even become angry when Julian kissed his mother. He would tell the 7-year-old, "Get off my wife," she testified.
The marriage began to sour, and according to the neighbor we mentioned earlier, Kevin Bennett, it was well known that Julia Hudson wanted out. Quote, Julia didn't want to deal with him because she started to see what kind of person he was, he said.
Mhm.
Julia was already leaving him, and he got mad about that.
Balfour was thrown out of the Hudson home by Julia's mother at some point in the winter of 2007, 2008. But during the 8 months that the couple was separated, they were still in frequent contact and were still sometimes intimate. On numerous occasions, Balfour had threatened to kill Julia's family and then her if she did not come back to him.
In June of 2008, police stopped a vehicle that had turned a corner at high speed in an area where they were investigating calls of shots fired. Balfour was the driver, and police said they found drugs in the car. The Illinois Department of Corrections was contacted about the new drug charges because Balfour was on parole, but the agency decided not to return him to prison. The court dismissed the case in July after a Cook County Circuit judge found that police had no probable cause to arrest Balfour.
In August of 2008, Balfour attended a birthday party for the little boy of one of Julia's coworkers, Jeannie Myers. Jeannie's husband, Robin, noticed that Balfour had a gun on his waistband. Balfour struck up a conversation with Robin, during which Balfour complimented Robin's wife, Jeannie, saying that she was more caring and nice than his own wife, whom he thought was cheating on him with someone from work. He told Robin that if it proved to be true, quote, "I'm fucking her and him up," end quote.
Balfour complained about Julia's family, saying that the quote fat bitch, meaning Darnell, did not want him around, and the quote fat ass, meaning Jason, claimed Balfour was stealing, which, by the way, he was. At least 10 times during this conversation, Balfour made threats against one or more members of the Hudson family. At this point, Balfour had known Robin Myers for about 10 minutes.
Balfour actually told many people outside of the family that he meant to do harm to his wife and members of her family, particularly her brother Jason, who was also a cocaine dealer and the object of scorn from Balfour, and whom he openly mocked because of his weight. Not cool. Balfour had also stolen Jason's gun and was seen in possession of it only days before the murders.
Also in August, Deborah Hampton, a regular customer of Balfour's, was looking to buy crack, and Balfour told her to meet him in the back of the Hudson home, which was about a block from her house. When she got there, she saw Balfour crouched down near a window peering into the Hudson home. Balfour admitted that he was watching Julia and her new boyfriend in the home. Balfour admitted that he was watching Julia and her new boyfriend in the home. Creepy.
So many problems with this individual's behavior.
Yeah.
Early in the morning of October 24th, 2008, Balfour went to his wife's home where he peered into her bedroom window as she was dressing before going to work. She allowed him in the house and to talk while she continued to get ready for work. She noted that he smelled of alcohol.
Balfour saw some balloons and flowers that someone had given to Julia, and they began to argue about the fact that she was seeing somebody else during their separation. Balfour was known by many to be very agitated about this, despite the fact that he himself had at least two girlfriends.
In fact, just the day before, Balfour had been at the home of one of his girlfriends, Shanta Cathy, and he had been involved with Shanta for several months, during which time he would sleep at her house 4 or 5 nights a week. At first, she was unaware that he was still married, but she later learned that fact and also that he had at least one other girlfriend.
He left Shanta's house early that day, saying he would be back, but he never returned, claiming that he could not get back and that he needed a jack for his car. But he had actually spent the night with another girlfriend named Diana.
Mm.
However, that didn't stop him from also trying to call Julia twice on his cell phone in the middle of the night.
Back to the day of the murders, though, when Julia left the house, Balfour left with her. She then drove off to go to work. Balfour lingered in his car near the home for a while before going to a service station to buy power steering fluid. Shortly after Julia got to work, she saw a letter informing her that wages were going to be garnished because Balfour had failed to pay on a car loan that was in both of their names. This led to a cell phone call to Balfour and another argument.
Sometime around 9 a.m., a bullet was fired through the front door of the Hudson home. Inside the home, Julia's mother was shot in the back. She walked further into the house and was shot again, this time in the chest, landing on the living room floor. Jason was also shot to death in his bedroom, and Julian disappeared from the home, as did Jason's white SUV.
So he's been drinking, right? He's agitated by the fight that he had with Julia before they left, and then
Right?
when they were on the phone, and then boom, he just
Yep.
snaps. Balfour arrived at the home of Shante Cathy around noon, carrying a bottle of Hennessy. He soon left, carrying a pair of blue Timberland boots. A couple hours later, while Shanta was out shopping, she ran into Balfour walking on a sidewalk. And Balfour was still dressed in the same outfit as when he left the house, a white hoodie, black pants, and a pair of Air Jordans. And he was going to check on his car.
An hour later, he returned to her house, but the hoodie and sneakers were gone, and he was wearing a red Pele jacket and the Timberland boots that he was carrying earlier. He said he had a headache. Kathy thought he looked upset, so she followed him to the bedroom, where he said if anybody asked, she was to say that he'd been there since 10 a.m.
Then he blurted out, "They got shot." "Who?" she asked. "Her mother and brother," he said, and she stared at him, crazy and bug-eyed. Balfour told her that he went to the Hudson house and the brother rushed him, so Balfour shot him, and, quote, "the mother was coming down the stairs calling his name," end quote, so he shot her too. She then asked about the little boy, and Balfour said he was outside and assured her that she had nothing to worry about.
She then said, I hope ain't nothing happened to the little boy, and he repeated that she had nothing to worry about. Kathy later said that she was terrified for her safety and that of her two young children, so she agreed to serve as Balfour's alibi if police inquired about his whereabouts. She allowed him to hide out the rest of the day in her apartment, where she said he talked on his phone and watched television. She later said, I was scared and wanted to do everything he wanted so he wouldn't hurt us.
Makes sense. About 3 p.m., Julia returned home from work, having just received a text message from Balfour in which he said he wanted to, quote, get down with her that night. As Julia approached the front door, she saw the bullet hole but noticed that the door was still locked. She then unlocked the door, walked into the home, and saw her mother's dead body on the floor.
She ran screaming from the home and got a neighbor to go into the house to check on her mother, brother, and son. The neighbor came out with the news that the young boy was nowhere to be found and that the two others were dead. Julia called 911 and police arrived at the home, where they soon confirmed that Julian was missing, along with Jason's white SUV.
So, when asked if there was anybody who might want to harm her family, Julia immediately gave police officers the name of her estranged husband, who made threats to her and her family. A neighbor told officers that he was aware Balfour was stalking Julia and that Balfour had, quote, made comments that he was going to kill everyone in the house, end quote.
Neighbors reported hearing gunshots that came from the direction of the Hudson home shortly after 9 a.m., which did not alarm them because, unfortunately, it was a relatively common occurrence in the Englewood neighborhood.
While Julia was standing with police outside her home, Balfour called her and said that he had been told about the shootings by someone in the neighborhood. Interesting. He said he was, quote, up north, end quote, but was coming right over. Instead, he stayed on the west side. He spent some of his time trying to get somebody to move his car to the west side since it was stranded on the south side and trying to create alibis for his whereabouts earlier in the day.
Because Julian was missing, an Amber Alert was issued, and CPD had officers from its Special Victims Unit on the scene. Balfour's cell carrier was contacted and asked to use cell tower data in an effort to locate him. Cell tower triangulation showed that Balfour was somewhere in the neighborhood of Shanta Cathy's house.
Later that afternoon, more than a dozen police officers converged on Shanta Cathy's residence. Balfour attempted to flee and briefly resisted arrest, but both Balfour and Shanta were taken into custody for questioning. Balfour was found to be in possession of his cell phone, some keys, and a Chicago Transit Authority pass. Police later identified the keys as belonging to Jason Hudson's SUV.
Balfour was interviewed over a couple of hours. He claimed that right after seeing his wife that morning, his car broke down and he went to get some power steering fluid. He then claimed that around 8:30 he parked his car near Robeson High School, located several blocks from the Hudson home, and then took the CTA, which is Chicago's public transportation, to Cathy's home using his CTA pass. He told police that he got to her home around 10 a.m. and that he had been there ever since.
He tried to persuade police that the murders happened because Jason ran a drug house, quote unquote, that Jason had enemies. He told them that Jason had been shot before and that the house had been burglarized while Balfour was incarcerated a few months earlier. Balfour was instructed to give police the shirt and pants he was wearing, and Balfour made a point to tell detectives that he had been wearing those clothes all day.
Cathy was taken to an interrogation room where she initially backed up Balfour's alibi by claiming that he had been at her home as early as 10 in the morning, but she eventually told police that he had actually arrived 2 hours later. She then spoke of his behavior in the hours before being arrested, which included changing his clothes while away from the home and his statement that he had killed his mother-in-law and brother-in-law while his stepson Julian was outside.
William Balfour was held for 48 hours. He was then taken into custody by the Illinois Department of Corrections on a suspected parole violation. Meanwhile, the citywide search for Julian King continued. The murders and the search made national headlines because of the relationship of the victims to Jennifer Hudson.
3 days after the murders, a woman named Lynette Williams called police after seeing a white SUV parked near her home that matched media reports related to the Hudson murders. She first remembered seeing the SUV on the morning after the murders, and when she saw media reports over the weekend about the murders and the search for Julian, she thought it might be related.
Inside the SUV, which was located about 2 miles from Shanta Cathy's home, police saw a child's hand from under a shower curtain that covered a body which lay on the floor of the car's back seat. It was 7-year-old Julian, and he had been shot in the head.
Investigators determined that the driver's seat was less than 2 feet from the brake pedal, which was inconsistent with Jason's size, but was consistent with Balfour's considerably smaller size. Police conducted a massive foot search of the streets, alleys, and yards between the vehicle's location and Shanta Cathy's residence, a distance of approximately 2 miles.
Just a half a block from the vehicle's location, searchers found a gun that was identified by numerous witnesses as Jason Hudson's, and whose ballistics matched the bullets that killed all 3 victims. And Balfour was arrested at Stateville Correctional Center, where he was being held on the parole violation charges. So now we are going to dive into the trial. Balfour pleaded not guilty to the charges and claimed he was nowhere near the house when the murders occurred occurred. During opening statements, Balfour's defense attorney told jurors that police targeted him for the crime because they were under pressure to quickly solve what they knew would become a high-profile case because of Jennifer Hudson's celebrity.
On April 23rd, 2012, Jennifer Hudson, the first witness to be called on by the prosecution, testified in court against William Balfour. While remembering her family, she reportedly broke down in tears several times on the stand. Julia took the stand later the same day and said that her husband threatened her because she wanted to separate, telling her, quote, "If you leave me, you'll be the last to die. I'll kill your family first," unquote.
The prosecution called other witnesses who testified that Balfour had threatened to kill members of the Hudson family on at least 24 occasions before the murders. Witnesses also testified that they had seen Balfour in possession of Jason Sig's Sauer semi-automatic weapon. Ballistic evidence showed that the 4 fired cartridge cases from the Hudson home and the 3 bullets from autopsies were all fired by that same gun.
A CTA witness testified that Balfour's CTA pass had not been used on the date of the murders, although Balfour had told police that he used the pass around 9 that morning to get to Shanta Cathy's apartment. Cell phone activity evidence was also introduced, which outlined some of Balfour's whereabouts that day.
Prosecutors produced several witnesses who said they were contacted by Balfour on the date of the murders and asked to provide him with an alibi or sketchy-sounding assistance of some sort. Several friends of Balfour's testified about phone calls and text exchanges in the afternoon hours in which he either asked them for help with his car or for an alibi. If asked, they were to say that he had been out west all day.
A man named William Graham, who lived on the same street as Shanta Cathy, testified that he saw Balfour around noon on the day of the murders driving a white SUV, which he parked in a vacant lot up against a building across from Graham's house, even though there were plenty of spaces down the block in front of the home where he knew Balfour stayed.
He told the jury he found this odd because Balfour had never driven that vehicle before, and Balfour had always parked near where he was staying. He saw Balfour get out of the SUV and walk to Cathy's home with a bottle of liquor.
Shanta Cathy also testified and told the court about Balfour's admission to her that he had killed Darnell and Jason. She also admitted that she had lied to police for a number of hours before telling them the truth.
And in May of 2012, after a 3-day deliberation, the jury found Balfour guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, as well as home invasion, aggravated kidnapping, residential burglary, and possession of a stolen motor vehicle. Jurors said Balfour's cell phone records were the key piece of evidence, allowing the jury to piece the timeline together and figure out that, quote, he could not be in 2 places at once, end quote.
Also key were 2 videos. One was a security video from a high school showing the time Balfour's car was left parked on the street, which was at 12:30 p.m. And the other, the police interrogation video in which Balfour claims that he left it there at 8:30 a.m. on the day of the murders, proving that Balfour lied.
The sentencing hearing was held in July of 2012. During the hearing, Balfour told the court, my deepest sympathies go to Julian King. I loved him. I still love him, end quote. No, you didn't. Under Illinois law, because Balfour had been convicted of more than 1 murder, the sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole was predetermined. Therefore, Jennifer and Julia Hudson chose not to read victim impact statements.
However, Julian's father, Gregory King, did. On the stand, he recalled the desperate 3-day search for Julian that ended when his body was found inside Jason Hudson's stolen SUV on the west side. Quote, instantly, it was like a chunk of my heart was ripped out, he said. I felt hopeless. I was filled with rage for William Balfour, the man who murdered my son. Judge Charles Burns called William Balfour's statement of love for Julian, quote, an insult to all of us, saying, your heart is an Arctic night and your soul is as barren as dark space. Julian shared his life with you. For sure, he looked up to you. There's no doubt in my mind he looked up to you as you were putting bullets into his head. I just hope his terror was short-lived.
In February of 2016, Balfour gave an interview to ABC7, Why, in which he claimed that he was innocent and that his conviction was the result of police conspiracy. So he said that all of the evidence against him was planted. And the reason why I bring that up is that it's not unheard of that they
Yeah.
might engage in conspiracy. But in
Yeah. Balfour appealed his case but was denied. He's currently serving a life sentence without parole in Pontiac Correctional Center in Pontiac, Illinois.